Back home, almost 3 months, schools around the country have welcomed back grade 7 and 12 learners under new COVID-19 health protocols. Out of 23,675 schools, 23,100 were open today, and that's according to the Department of Basic Education's recovery plan. The second batch of learners are expected back in class at the beginning of July. For more on this, we're now joined via Skype by the co-head of research at Equal Education, Rone McFarlane. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for having us.
So the last time we spoke, it was a few weeks before today, and your big concern at that stage was there's a plan, but with very little detail. Well, it's happened now. Has the situation improved in terms of information?
Yeah, Peter, I think that definitely we are in a better position now than we were a couple of weeks ago to understand what the department's plans are and how far they are with implementing those plans. The department has developed standard operating procedures which describe what must be in place in a school, and it's also passed directives to clarify that and to indicate who's responsible for delivering and monitoring the implementation of those requirements. We've also now received reports from the DG and from the National Education Collaboration Trust to give us a bit more of a sense on implementation, because this was also our big concern. It's one thing to say this is what we're going to do. It's a whole other thing to actually show what you have done. So we definitely last night got a better sense of what is in place, especially in terms of PPE delivery, so personal protective equipment, and also the delivery of water. There are still some key issues that the Director General didn't touch on, things like the number of toilets that were delivered, how additional public learner transport is going to be provided and what the situation is around that, along with questions around classrooms and teachers, which will become a more pressing concern as we move towards further grades coming back into school. So the picture that was painted last night by the department was definitely an encouraging one, and one has to say a surprising one. A lot has happened in the past week. We were definitely not in this position a week ago. But the proof now really lies in what actually happens on the ground. So Equal Education has learner members in 5 provinces across the country who are going back to school and who are filling in surveys to evaluate what's the real picture when they actually get to school.
All right, so what's been your rough kind of look on the first day? I know that your information is still coming in the provinces that you're watching. But at first glance, what sense did you get of the situation on the ground?
Yeah. Already in yesterday's briefing, we got the sense that unfortunately not all schools in the country are ready to reopen, and that a big number of those schools are in rural provinces. And it's unfortunate that we are in that position where essentially learners have been let down by the system which hasn't been able to make sure that they can return to school today. We know specifically of schools in the Eastern Cape where some learners went to school and were turned back because their schools weren't actually ready to go to school. We've also heard from learners in the Western Cape who obviously have now been in school for a week, or at least some of them have been in school for a week. And their learners have been reporting quite encouraging figures that learners are wearing masks, that the basics are in place, they're getting screened, and they're social distancing in their classrooms. And some learners have pointed to issues with access to water, which also in yesterday's briefing, we heard is the two big issues. The one is water and the other one is toilets. Are the big challenges that most provinces are struggling to sort out. And it's even a challenge in some of in the urban provinces like Gauteng and the Western Cape. It is really important that we continue monitoring what's happening in schools, because we'll be seeing increasing numbers of learners returning to schools, and so those experiences might change. And it's also important to keep in mind that readiness is a shifting measure, because yesterday's briefing was talking about readiness in terms of grade 7s and grade 12s returning, and the measures that have been put in place up to this point is proportionate to the around 13% of learners who are returning to school now. But once more grades phase in, readiness will mean something different, and that's when we'll start seeing the real challenges, especially in terms of classroom space and teachers, where it will become very difficult to keep those social distancing measures.
Again, sadly, it seems as if, in the end, it's almost the luck of the draw. If you're born in the urban areas and go to a good school, perhaps in the right suburbs, versus someone who's in the rural areas in a very far-off, far-flung place, what your situation is.
Definitely. And the worst part of that is that the lockdowners have also affected those learners the most. So it's harder for those learners to learn at home. There might be various challenges in their home environments. It might be harder for their schools to stay connected to learners. It might be harder to access a device and even a room where you can sit and study. So actually for those learners, it's the most urgent to return to school. If anything, this time has really reminded us of the inequalities in our education system. And the unfortunate reality is that many learners will be encountering those inequities when they go back to school. And so it's really important that we don't just fight for schools to be COVID ready, but that we also continue to push for a more equitable education system, which is actually a much broader task than just preparing schools for COVID measures.
One thing that I would like to raise with you, perhaps you might have found things out. 1,500 schools were vandalized for some reason. And, you know, for me, watching this, it's a mystery that anybody would want to do this. Has your organization been able to find out some of the reasons behind this vandalism? Has anything come out of the Department of Basic Education?
The Department of Basic Education yesterday was suggesting that some of the vandalism is related to willful destruction of property, that some people are just coming into bathrooms and destroying toilets and taps, and was suggesting kind of that there's an element of just wanting to be disruptive. She also said that in Gauteng, they are concerned that there might be a kind of syndicate at work targeting schools. From our experience, we've spoken to about 30 principals across the country, and where we've seen damages to schools, they've always related to theft as the main reason behind that destruction of property. And that really is an issue that we know is usually an issue during school holidays. It's usually an issue even over a weekend break. And so it speaks to a broader concern about the extent to which the education system is able to protect schools, whether that means securing schools better or working with communities to watch over schools in their community. There aren't sufficient measures in place at the moment to protect many schools that are vulnerable to theft, to those types of damages.
All right, and perhaps finally, do you think that the 2020 academic year can be saved?
You know, we think that that's a question that we should be very hesitant about, because it's a question that has the risk of really putting incredible pressure on learners who find themselves in an extraordinary year. And it would be unfair to expect learners to complete a year in the same way that learners complete their academic year in any other year. It's important that learners cover basic aspects of their curriculum. We know that, for instance, reading and learning is a big challenge in South Africa, and that it's important that in this time there's a focus on that. But to expect learners to complete a full curriculum would be incredibly unfair.
All right, so let's leave it there. But certainly, as you say, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see what happens in the coming weeks, particularly as more grades start to come back to school. But for today, Rone McFarlane, thanks so much indeed for joining us and sharing your insights with us. Good night.